Selling with storytelling. Stories sell, and the people who can tell a good sales story will sell more than the people who cannot. Having a great product and a good sales pitch just isn't enough. You need great stories to go with them. In this EIY education section, let's learn how to leverage the power of storytelling to sell your product or service. Mr. Francisco Mahfuz has always loved speaking, even before he had anything useful to say. He's been telling his stories in front of audiences for close to a decade and even became a national champion of public speaking. Today, Francisco is a keynote speaker and storytelling coach and offers communication training to individuals and international organizations. He's the author of Bear, a guide to brutally honest public speaking, and the host of the Storypowers Podcast. Hello, Mr. Francisco. Welcome you to EIY Education section.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And hello everyone, if you have any questions related to our topic, selling with storytelling, you just comment on the comment section so that we can address any questions you may have. Now, the first question I have for you is, why is selling with storytelling important for our audience to listen to Mr. Francisco?
I think what tends to happen in most cases is that the way we talk to people tends to be very much based on facts and figures and statements and opinions. And although that makes sense to communicate that way, that's just not how the human brain works. That is just not how we make decisions. That's not how our communication becomes more engaging and memorable. The door is going. I'm going to completely ignore it for a moment. The reality is that we make decisions based on emotion. And if you want to tap into the emotional side of our brain, we need one of the best ways to do that is through storytelling. And that is one of the main reasons why, when it comes to selling, you need to use storytelling. Now, if you can excuse me for 30 seconds, because this person is gonna keep hitting my door if I don't rush off there, I'll be back in 30 seconds. I swear.
Okay, sure. So, hi everyone. You just wait for a few seconds for him to go back here because someone is waiting for him outside so that he can open the door. So, in the meantime, I'm gonna share with you the topic selling with storytelling.
I'm back.
Yeah,
I'm back. Sorry.
Yeah, just continue, Mr. Francisco.
Yes, no, I think the main reason, the simplest reason is that we really struggle to be interested in what other people are saying because they are just giving us facts, they're giving us figures, they're giving us their opinion, and the brain just not evolved to communicate that way. We forget things very easily. There are statistics that suggest that if you give people facts or statistics, within about 10 minutes, 95% of the people have forgotten what those statistics or facts are, but 63% of people will remember a story you told them. So there's many different reasons why you would use stories when you sell, but one of the main ones is that it will make people pay attention, will make people remember, and it will make it easier for people to be moved to action.
So I see, I understand that storytelling is one of the ways to engage your listeners to what you said, right?
Yes, very much so.
Now let's talk about corporate environment. Whenever we touch emotional factors, it's hard to have people to persuade people to use storytelling because it's engaging with emotions. While we need to be professional in working environment, so how can we help people understand that storytelling help others to persuade because it related to emotional factors?
I think there is a big misunderstanding when it comes to this idea of communicating emotionally. So what I'm not suggesting is that every time you communicate, particularly in a business environment, you're going to get very vulnerable, and you're going to talk about things that moved you emotionally and things that made you sad. That's not it at all. What I am suggesting is that you need to connect the part of people's brains that controls their emotion. So when you put the same information in the form of a story, or the way I like to explain to people, in the form of an example, a real life example that makes the point, you're gaining all the advantages of a story, but you don't need to go into anything emotional the way most people understand it. So let me make it a little clearer with an example. If someone asks you, why do you think that doing this, this particular thing with our marketing is better than what we're doing now, you can just give a whole bunch of opinions, but you can say, well, we ran a project 3 months ago, and we had been doing the same thing we've always done with our marketing, but then one of our managers decided to try something different, and this is what we did, and this is what the results, and this is what the customers told us. So we believe that the same approach would work better now. That's it. You've just told a little story about something that happened in real life, and you're using that to make your point. That would work a lot better than saying, previous projects have shown us that approach can be effective. So that's
So
it.
it means that storytelling can be examples that you can edit in order to elaborate your point.
Yeah, it's not only examples. I mean, you can talk about things that haven't happened in real life. Some people like to talk about movies, or you can talk about fairy tales and things like that. Whatever is useful for people to understand what you're trying to say. But in the vast majority of cases, I think that if you're using real life examples from your life, from the life of other people in the company, from the lives of other people in the industry that you're working in, just makes it a lot easier for people to understand. So say, for example, you're trying to convince people that the company needs to innovate, to change out of something you've been doing for a very long time that has been successful. You could easily talk about, say, Kodak, and how they used to dominate the photography market, but then didn't want to have digital, they didn't go into digital photography, even though they weren't the first people to start looking into that technology. And then Kodak became not irrelevant, but it stopped being the biggest player in that industry because of that decision. And something similar was the case with, say, BlackBerry. BlackBerry didn't see this change coming in the phones with the touch screens and people wanting to actually browse the internet, and that essentially killed the company. So if you use those examples instead of just trying to argue that innovation is really important, and if you don't innovate, you die, it just, the story just works better. It's just more visual, it's more memorable, and none of that has to do with you getting very emotional about things, but it will make it easy for people to decide things at an emotional level.
I see. Now I get your point. In order to use stories, we may need to understand what are components of story and how can you distinguish between facts and storytelling.
Well, how do you distinguish facts and storytelling? I think a story is made up often of a whole bunch of facts, but a fact doesn't necessarily have context. So I can tell you, for example, that in Spain, about 82% of the adult population is fully vaccinated. That's a fact. There's no context around it. If I want you to understand why, I might say that Spain has no history of people being anti-vaccinations, and the government has made it very easy, and they've done this and they've done all these other things. So now I'm giving you a whole bunch of context for for the fact I've just given you, and it makes it easier to understand than if I just given you the number. But the way I tend to think of stories is, you have, compared to facts at least, it's a story has a time and place. It has at least one character, has a sequence of connected events. So this
Mm,
happened, and then this happened, and this happened, and it has something that is unexpected or surprising. Because if it doesn't have, if it's missing some of these things, then it's more likely than not not a story, and it won't have the same benefits of using a story that using a story would.
so please correct me if I'm wrong. So storytelling means that is a events and maybe some and it can be problems so that some people need to solve it. That is a component of story, right?
Yeah, if you don't have a problem,
Mm,
you don't have much of a story. You could say, for example, I could say I needed some food
mm,
so I could cook dinner tonight for my family. So I looked into the fridge, I made a list of the things I needed. I went down to the supermarket and I bought them.
mm,
I mean, why would I ever bother telling anyone that way? I would just say to my wife, yeah, I just bought the stuff we needed for dinner. But
mm,
if I went down to the supermarket, if I
mm,
said to her, listen, I made a list and I went down to the supermarket, but when I got there, they didn't have anything. Like the
mm,
shelves were completely empty, not a little empty. They were completely empty. There was absolutely nothing in the store. And I said, what's going on here? And they said, oh, we have to do some construction work in this floor of the supermarket, so we had to move all the food to a different part of the supermarket. Now I started having a bit of a problem. There's at least something different or surprising in there that I will probably tell my wife or anyone else, because
mm,
something is unexpected. If you don't have
mm,
that problem, that unexpected or surprising thing, then there is no point in sharing that, particularly in the form of a story. And when it comes to doing it in business, you
mm,
are usually going to be talking about problems anyway. If you're doing a
mm,
presentation, if you're leading a meeting, you're almost certainly going to talk about either problems that you want to solve or
mm,
problems that you have just solved. So it's going to be difficult to have that communication not involve a problem of some kind, and those are
mm.
the better times to use a story.
I see. I understand your point now. So the problem is really important when you would like to tell stories. Now, in order to deliver a successful presentation, that is a combination of emotion and also logics and facts and data. In case that you would like to persuade someone, should we put emotion or storytelling first when you present, or should you put facts and data first when you deliver a pitch?
I tend to find that the best way for
Mm,
most presentations to be effective, and
mm,
also to be more interesting than
mm,
usually presentations are is to start with a story that shows very clearly what the problem is
mm,
and the type of people being affected by that problem. So once
mm,
you do that, you now have made people understand the problem better and hopefully care about the people being affected. Once you've done that, then you can bring in your data and the rest of your facts, because you're probably not talking about something that affects one person. You're talking about something that affects hundreds or thousands of people. But that one example, that one story makes it very clear, makes us care, and then you can bring in all your facts and your data and your charts and all the graphs you want to bring in, because now we are paying attention and we are invested emotionally in this problem that you want to talk about. If you
mm,
bring the facts and the data first, it can happen that for the first
mm.
5 minutes or 10 minutes of your presentation, we're bored, we're not
Yeah.
engaged at all, and we don't really care. And by the
Mm,
time you bring the story in, you've already wasted a lot of your content, and
mm,
you might have wasted part of your credibility and attention too. So I think usually the story is the best way to start, and it doesn't need to be a big story. I often start presentations that are an hour long with a
mm,
2-minute story, just to
mm.
set the stage, just to get people listening, and then later you can bring different stories depending on how relevant they are. But yes, I would usually start with the story first.
I know, I understand. Now it means that Whenever you would like to deliver a successful presentation, you may want to put problems first and how those people surrounding that problem can be affected. Then you're going to bring up data logics later whenever people feel engaged in your presentation already.
Yes, so you want to back up the things you're saying. The story
Mm,
about one person doesn't really prove a point. It just proves that something happened to that one person. But once you establish that, you can say, and this is happening to all of our
mm,
customers. This is happening to thousands of our customers. And then you can bring the data to back up that claim. But
mm,
once you've made that first story is like, okay, I understand 100% what that problem is, but how
mm.
big is that problem? And for that, you're going to need the data and the figures. So that's also why it works well to have story first and then data after.
That is a very useful tip, Mr. Francis. The next question we have for you is that what are the successful components of a story? It means that whenever you would like to tell a successful story, what are the factors to make a successful story?
So a lot of people tend to think of this as what was the structure, what are the elements. I
Mm,
find that the main thing you need is a story that has a point. That to begin with is the very first thing you need. Does the point you're trying to illustrate, the point you're trying to make, is that connected to this little story you want to share? If it is, then you can look at what the elements are. And the elements, the way I tend to think of them for a very effective story are you need a relatable character. You need
mm,
someone that the audience can identify with, or at the very least understand well. If you then you need a problem that character cares about, because if it's not, as we talked about before, if there is not much of a problem, there is not much of a story. So you need a bit of a problem in there, and the characters need to be affected by that problem. Apart from that, all you really need, I think,
mm,
is you need specific details in that
mm,
story to bring it to life. And
mm,
also that also shows people understand what you're talking about. If you're telling a story but you don't know the names of the people involved, you don't know when it happened, you don't know how, the numbers for, if it's a financial story of any kind, how much money were they spending or how much was it costing them. Those things will add to your credibility when you add them into the story. And you want the story to be happening in a moment in time. So you don't want to
mm,
say, over the last 10 years, this person has had to struggle against this and that. That doesn't really work. You want to pick
mm,
one moment in time and say, 3 months ago, Anne was trying to set up her educational streaming program, and this happened. So
mm,
it works a lot better if it's one moment in time. So those are the elements. And the way I tend to think of it is people find the story, make sure that there is a point to it, and then they go back in and say, okay, what are the elements there? Are they clear? Do I have a relatable character? Do I have a problem that they care about? Are there specific details? Is the story happening in a moment in time? And then once you have all of those, you almost certainly have an effective story.
I see. So those are successful factors to make a successful story. Now let's come to different kinds of corporate storytelling in companies. Do you see that? What are some kinds of stories that corporate professionals often tell?
One of the most common stories is a lessons learned story. So
Mm,
whatever you're going through now, let's say you're trying to implement a new initiative.
mm,
Maybe you've tried doing something like that in the past, either at work
mm,
or personally. So you might
mm,
share a story that shows what happened last time. We
mm,
tried it and it was successful. Okay, that's a story you can share. We tried it, it was a failure. Okay, and what did you learn from that, from trying to do that first time? So that's a pretty typical story you can share. You can share a story about what a lot of people call an origin story or a founder story. So
mm,
how did your company start? How did
mm,
your business start? How did the particular project start? So you just go back to the beginning of however much back you need to go to find what's relevant to what you're going through now, and that will often clarify to people any types of challenges you're going through now, or might clarify why you care about certain things. It might show sort of the journey you've gone through to get to where you are now. So those are very common ones. And a third very common one is what I tend to call a help story, which is about the people you help. So
Yeah.
this, some other people call this a value story or a customer story. So if you are trying, but this is particularly useful in a sales environment. If you are trying to explain to someone about the work you do or the services you provide, you can just explain it to them in statements and facts, but you can also just say, just last week I was talking to a client of mine, and this is the problem they were going through. This and that was happening, and then we looked at different alternatives. We thought of this, we thought of that, and we ended up doing this, and the outcome was this. So instead of explaining as we can do this, and that, and these are the things we're gonna give you, you're just giving them an example from real life, from a customer of yours or client, as a way to get that point across. So a help story, an origin story, and a lessons learned story are pretty common ones that people use in business.
So those are two common types of stories that corporate professionals often tell in their environment. In time of crisis, just like COVID-19, what kinds of story that we often tell in corporate environment, Francis?
I think it would depend on what is the objective. But a story is often a way to just illustrate why you should do one thing instead of something else. So if your argument is because of COVID, you should keep doing everything the same way and you shouldn't panic, then maybe you go back to a time when you had another crisis and you did the same thing and that was the right decision. Or you can also go back to a time when you had a crisis and you tried to change everything and that turned out to be the wrong decision. And that's why now you're not going to do the same thing again. So you often are going to just look for an example of when you did that thing and it worked, or you did something else and that didn't work. And that can apply to just about anything. So the argument for COVID could be something like that. It could be an argument for changing things, as a lot of companies have done with remote work. It could be an argument about taking advantage of the opportunity. And maybe you go back to a time when everybody was panicking about something else and you decided that the best thing to do was to play it safe. And actually you missed out on some big opportunity because of that. And that's not what you should do right now. So that's it. You're just trying to prove that whatever idea you have now is the best way to approach this problem, because either you did it in the past or because you did something else and you failed at it.
Now I understand. So change story is really common in time of crisis that corporate professionals can use in their work, right?
Yes.
Now, there is a common term nowadays that is storytelling with data. Can you please elaborate that one in how can we tell story with data?
Yes. So this is a very, very complicated subject. We probably don't have time to go into the details of that, but there's a few things that most people can do that will already help them become better data storytellers. So one of the simplest ways is to think of your presentation as a story, and then make sure that whatever data you're introducing to people is done in the form of a story. So for example, you can start the presentation by saying, this is how things were. This is what our company was like. This is what our customers were like. But then something happened. There was a problem. There's something that changed. Okay. And so, because of that, we had to do a whole bunch of different things. And now things are different. Or if you're talking about something that is likely to happen or you want to happen, you can say, this is the problem we're having now. So we propose that we're going to do these things differently. And after, this is the results we expect. So that has the shape of a story. It's a, before, but, so, after is a pretty straightforward story structure. But you're putting your data in that shape. So you could say, for the last 3 years, we were the market leaders, and this is the market share we had, and this is how many new clients we were gaining every year. But then this new competitor came in. Over the next 6 months, this is what started happening, and then you bring in the data to show what happened over that time. So we have taken these measures to try and win back our market position. And after that, we what happened was we had ended up getting back to the first position in the market. So you're still sharing data, but you're putting it in the form of a story. So that's one of the most basic ways of doing it. The other way of doing it is you just trying to find real people to illustrate the points. So you could say, we were. So, for example, you could say that Microsoft was the market leader on personal computing in the 1990s, and they had 95% of the market share.
Yeah.
But the frustration that a lot of people had was this: you are at home and you have your PC, and every 3-4 days there's some update, and there's something comes up on your screen, and you have to update it. And then every time you need to buy a new computer, there's so many different options you can buy. There's like 50 different brands and 100 different models. You just don't really know what to do. And that's when Apple came in with essentially, two computers. You got the super professional one, and you get the more casual one that has funky colors. And a lot of people just related to that. And they're like, well, I just want more simplicity in my life. I want something a little cooler because this thing takes a massive space in my desk, and I want it to be orange and not just this boring gray. And that's when we started losing market. That's when Microsoft started losing market share. So you introduced a bit of a story about a real person facing a frustration or a problem to just humanize your data a little bit, instead of just saying, we lost 5% of market share, and we believe the reason was because customers wanted more simplicity in their choices. Right. So one option was a story structure in your data. The other option is finding opportunities to tell little stories that humanize that data. So people watching the presentation can identify with that and go, oh yeah, I remember that. I hated all the updates, and that's why I started using a Mac. Right. So that's another way of doing it.
Yeah. So please correct me if I'm wrong. So if I understand you correctly, storytelling with data means that you would like to convey the implication of data through the form of story.
Yes. Again, there's many different ways of doing it, but either you want to have your presentation and your data delivered in the form of a story, or you just want small individual stories about people, ideally, to humanize the data that you're sharing. Those are two very basic approaches of doing data storytelling. There's a whole lot more that involves the graphics and how do you do the visualizations. I recently just interviewed someone on my podcast about it, and he had, I think, 40 pages of his book just on different ways you can do graphs on your data and how they can tell more of a story. But I think for most people, if they just think of a story structure or little stories to humanize the data, that's probably a lot better than what most people do with their presentations.
Now I understand it. Very useful, Mr. Francisco. I think that it's time for us to share the final message with our audience here. What is your final message that you would like to share with us related to selling with storytelling?
The way most people communicate is, for being completely honest, a bit
Yeah.
boring. It's not super engaging. It's not super memorable. It doesn't necessarily drive other people to action. And and boring at the end of the day is bad for business. So one of the most important things people can spend time on is making their communication more impactful. And one of the most time-tested ways of doing that is storytelling. It's been around for hundreds of thousands of years. It's not the easiest thing in the world to start doing well, but once you start getting good at it, you see how drastically changes the way people respond to any type of communication you do, to your presentations, to your social media posts, to your meetings, and to anything else you do in business. So it's definitely a superpower that everybody can get access to if they just put in a bit of time and effort into it.
Okay, so we have the superpower, but we don't know yet, right?
Yes,
Yep.
yes. I think most people know about it,
Mm.
but they haven't ever tried getting a little bit better at it. And it's pretty surprising that to be fantastic at it takes a lot of time and effort. To be better than the vast majority of people, not so much.
I see. Now I understand. So the next step is that we're gonna apply it into reality in order to utilize it.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Francisco, for joining us tonight and sharing with us useful tips related to storytelling with data and selling. So thank you so much. And on behalf of our viewers, I feel thankful for that. And hi everyone, it's our time to end our live stream tonight, and we hope to see you in the upcoming live stream session conducted by EIY. My name is An. Bye bye.